welcome to HipMojo show number 30. I'm your host, Ashkan Karbas-Rushan, and joining me is Rebecca Brayton.
Hello.
So, online video content is hard enough, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the category of news. News is obviously one of the more popular segments of content, but it's a tough business. It's a tough business in traditional television and even more so in video. So, let's get started.
All right, so how does video content fit in the real-time news equation?
Well, I think we live in a world where when it comes to content and news in particular, I do think we live in a world where being first, unfortunately, is more important than being right or even being correct. I think especially in the blogs, and now unfortunately traditional media has to follow suit, you see a lot of publications that just want to be the first one to publish. Forget fact-checking. We're talking not even grammar and spelling mistakes. So I think in that context, the problem is that video takes a lot longer to produce than articles. So we'll talk a little bit more about videos, but I think already with articles, what you're seeing is that the first one to get out there is probably the first one that's going to get mentioned on social media, shared, and obviously more traffic means more revenue. So unfortunately, there is currently a disincentive to be quick, more so than correct or even good. And then I think that's all exacerbated in video because video is just so long to produce. And that's what makes online news so much challenging when you live in a world of Twitter and Facebook, social media.
Right, so in general, what are some of the specific challenges facing new media video producers?
Okay, so if you're talking about new media video producers, you're generally starting off with no built-in audience. The idea is you're producing content and you have to both build content and build distribution. So the main three challenges, just when it comes to audience building for content producers is one, generally speaking, users only sit through 30 to 60 seconds of a video. So what that means is you've got to captivate your audience very quickly. And as Twitter proves, it's harder to be insightful, funny, informative in 140 characters than in 140 words. So if you got 30 to 60 seconds to hook your audience, chances are that you might not. Two, 25% of a video's lifetime views tend to come in the first 4 days. That is the polar opposite of articles, which generally you publish, search engines index, and over time send you traffic. So with videos, it's pretty depressing that the first few days is when a video makes or breaks, so to speak. And then third, and this is I think the one that's the real punch in the gut, is that on average, a video on YouTube, and YouTube is the bellwether for video, is only seen 500 times in its lifetime. That's really not enough to build a business. I mean, that's like 50 cents of revenue for like however long your video is, and there's a good chance that it costs you a lot more to produce it. So when you bring those three challenges together, it is an uphill battle, and that could be for all videos, let alone news, which is very usually timely and time sensitive.
So what about more traditional content producers? What are their challenges?
Okay, so if you're a traditional media company, you probably have a brand, you have a catalog, and you also have existing audience and distribution. The challenge is for you, to quote Jeff Zucker, former CEO of NBC Universal, you don't want to trade your analog dollars for digital pennies or even quarters. So you don't want to take your premium, super premium content, publish it on the internet, and make pennies. And kill your business faster. So the biggest challenge that traditional media companies face is that their cost, whether it's union issues, labor issues, workflow processes, whatever, it's way too expensive for them to produce content for the web. If you take a look at in the US, for example, network television, ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, for like a typical 1 hour of programming, it can range from $1 million to $5 million. That's very expensive. If you go one notch below that for the specialty cable channels, it's still anywhere from like $250,000 to $1 million per hour. One of our advisors, he was a former president of National Geographic, and he's like, at National Geographic, it cost us $500,000 to $1 million per hour. That's insane. Now, in terms of web producers, the average right now, I'm not talking about the super, rough, quick, dirty video, nor am I talking about the super polished scripted entertainment that, was produced by, at a very high budget. But on average, web producers are creating content that costs between $50,000 and $100,000 an hour. We, at WatchMojo, being based in Montreal, we could produce content at a far lower cost. It costs us about $125 a minute. If you do the math, that's $7,500 on average to produce an hour, which is a hell of a comparative advantage. And I mean, you could argue that, sure, if you ship it off to China or India, you might even produce it lower. But I think content, unlike technology, you can't build software and not take into consideration whether it's culture or language or whatever. So I think, you know, it's like low enough is good enough. Just like last week, there was a transaction, Discovery Communications, which generates $4 billion with $1 billion in profit. It's a company that's worth $15 billion. They bought our friends over at Revision 3 for $30 million. And the incentive was not, oh, we need Revision 3 for revenue. It was, you know, they basically said, we, Discovery, are making content that costs us $500,000 to $750,000. If we want to do that at 1/10 of the cost, it's like, we're never going to get that done. It's just, you know, a reminder that, as I like to say, online video thus far is like the Afghanistan of the media industry. It's like everybody goes in, puts in all this money thinking they're going to come out victorious, and by and large, you just find yourself 5-10 years later still experimenting, trying to find a business model that works. No disrespect to the Afghanistan and Afghani people, by the way.
So within an organization, are there any specific challenges regarding content production?
Yes, there's a number. There was a recent sort of survey that said, generally speaking, the main issues are it's very challenging for companies to produce content that people want to watch. 2, getting the budget usually is a challenge because you're basically asking for money that's coming from other areas that could be articles or traditional media. 3, to produce enough content to please the masses, that's usually a challenge because, you know, you might, as I like to say, technology is a zero-sum game. You're going to buy a PC or a Mac. You're going to buy an Android phone or an iPhone usually. But with content, like if you're traveling to Barcelona, you'll probably read 3 articles and watch 5 videos. So you need to produce a lot of content. A couple of other things is sometimes in some organizations, you're going to have a very conflicting agenda. You're going to have management issues where you as a content person might want more videos, but your CEO and your CFO are like, yeah, this is a waste of money. And then finally, I think variety. That's another thing people like about WatchMojo is that we have, you know, we basically have a horizontal editorial strategy. So we produce content from automotive to video games. And then we filter that in like covering the people, places, and trends that you care about. And then we publish that in an events-based calendar. So anniversaries of deaths and births, historical milestones, album releases, film releases. That works for us. It gives us a lot of variety. It gives us a lot of depth and breadth. But that's hard. We can produce a lot of content, video content, because it's really the only thing we focus on. I think, you know, in my 6-7 years of both doing WatchMojo and speaking to other companies, the pattern's pretty clear. If you're going to be an aggregator, the ROI if you're going to look at content, the ROI from aggregating is quicker. The payback is quicker, and you get, you know, a higher return early on from aggregating because you don't have to worry about content creation. At the end of the day, you might be one of 1,000 aggregators, so that's a risky endeavor. But it is a faster payback than if you're a content producer. And then if you are a content producer, it's sort of the same thing where the payback is a lot faster if you're producing articles. But again, everybody produces articles, so long term, you're one of a million. So if you focus on videos and you find your niche and you find your little MO, I think you can build a nice business, but it's always very hard to do videos along with articles, and it's very hard to produce videos if you're also aggregating. Because sooner or later, you're like, why am I killing myself? Why not just aggregate and license content?
Right. So you said YouTube is the bellwether. So YouTube is big. How big is it?
How big is it? Well, put it to you this way. People upload 60 hours of content each minute on YouTube. So each minute, there's 60 hours of content that's uploaded. Now, granted, most of it might be crap, but quality is a very subjective matter online. A cat slipping off a toilet or a dog on a skateboard might be crap to you or I, but that's gold to, you know, the ADD generation Y now that is like, well, we don't care if it's polished or not. I read an interesting stat from a YouTube exec today on Twitter, so I'm going to read this if you don't mind. More video is uploaded to YouTube in 1 month than the 3 major US networks created in 60 years. I mean, there's another stat that the amount of content, so articles, social media, tweets, whatever, in 1 week that is uploaded now to the internet is more than like all of the content that's ever been produced 5 times over. So we're like not in the information age, we're in like the age of clutter, right? But here's the sort of dichotomy, because now you don't have this programming world where an editor programs content for the user to watch and then advertisers to sponsor. The sad truth is that the proportion of content that users watch, humor, news, violence, porn, God knows what, that the overlap between that and what advertisers like is tiny. And then the kind of content, the third circle, that let's say media companies, the distribution companies, the networks, those who either create or aggregate content, is even smaller because they want to portray, look, our audience likes this, even though their audience likes something else. At my old company, Ask Men, we had, let's say, I'm not giving anything away, it's pretty well known, we had 50% of our views, of our page views, came from our top 99 Babe Fest, basically. And then 35 to 40% came from sex and dating articles, okay? And then 5 to 10% only came from fashion, power and money and all this other stuff. But when we spoke to advertisers, even though they would click on, say, the dating, sex, and all that stuff, we said, look, we have fashion, we have how to be a better man, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like that with everyone, like Fortune, Forbes. If you actually, peel back the layers of the onions, it's the same thing. What people like, are sort of the bad things, but advertisers don't like that, so the media companies are going to mislead them and say, look, this is what people watch on our site.
Right. So what are some of the mistakes that new media producers are making?
Wow. I think new media producers, and this does touch a little bit in terms of news as well, is they make a few mistakes, and it's very common. One is, I think a lot of the content is not evergreen enough. So, for example, when we started in 2006, this was right before, Barack Obama's rise began. And a lot of guys would be, or gals would be very passionate, and they would just turn on their camera and just be like, Barack Obama is the best thing since sliced bread, or Barack Obama is a bum, how dare you vote for him? And that was extremely, extremely timely because, that's relevant then, and a few years later, whether he's a bum or a hero, it's like nobody cares about what you thought of him before. And that sort of touches the second mistake they make. Oftentimes, producers really produce talking head stuff. Actually, ironically, as you're watching this kind of show, this kind of format is the exception to WatchMojo's programming. The reason why we do it, frankly, is we covered this on the first show, is because in the business vertical, I write articles for a few publications, whether TechCrunch, paid content, Media Post, whatever, and I just felt it would make sense to have a weekly or frequent enough show that touches on some of these themes. Business, politics, and tech are some of the exceptions where this format makes sense. But if you're going to be producing content and all you do is talking head and timely, you better hope that somehow 1 million people are going to see it, because otherwise you're going to produce that, waste all that time and money for like 6 people to watch you rant about something. Sort of like maybe what I'm doing now. But again, this is like less than 1% of our programming. So I would say the usual mistake people make is that, whereas what they should do is say, you know what, NBC, they have an audience of whatever, 50 million people, 15 million people, whatever it is. They're going to talk about the daily stuff, and that's really the timely stuff that you turn to. How can I leverage the internet and the fact that everything is archived and the fact that you got this backlog of content? How can I build up a catalog that is visually rich and that will be relevant over time? So I think the issue there is if you think that something ought to be an article, don't produce a video for that subject.
Good rule. So the Huffington Post is launching the Huffington Streaming Network. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, sure. So AOL, which is desperately trying to reinvent itself, is basically investing $30 million after spending $300 million on Huffington Post to build a live news online platform. I think it's very ambitious. It's very risky at best, and it might be stupid at worst because, frankly, even though AOL is a big platform and 5min, the other company it bought, has a lot of long-tail syndication, they really, really need to execute perfectly for this to work. But if a company can come along the way CNN, back in the day you had 3 networks and then the cable specialty channels came, what you're seeing with the internet is a repetition of what cable did to television. So I don't think it means that nobody ought to do it, but it does make sense for a big company like AOL that doesn't really anymore have the television to defend to leverage Huffington Post and try to do this, but it's an extremely risky bet.
Right. So when something happens, like an announcement of death, something like that, how can publishers adapt and react?
Okay, I think ultimately to sort of close off, it's a good question because we could sort of give you the trade-off. I think you have to say short-term, long-term, there's a trade-off. If you're, when Amy Winehouse dies, tragically, short-term, you could create a quick talking head video that just talks about the events. Oh, she was found dead in her London flat, and she had a history of drug problems. And that is sort of what people want to hear. And frankly, I think an article suffices for that. But if you really want to do a video, that might work. And that really could be talking head with a few images, and it could be some music in the background. And it's like a low-cost approach. But what we've always done is we've said, screw that. The AP, Reuters, CP, all those guys are going to do that. What we do is we take more of the long-term approach, and we create a timeless bio or profile on that person. It's a bit more expensive to produce, and it's a lot more visually rich. There's a lot of B-roll, and there's a lot of fact-checking and proofreading and history and research. But that video then is good forever. So we purposely try to stay away from that initial interest, that first day, which is very much driven around the events of her death, or the person's death or news. And we go for the more long-term bet. So I think you just have to make a decision. One is the better long-term bet, more expensive long-term bet that you recoup over time, and that has a longer shelf life. The other one is that quick fix. The difference is it's a lot easier to do that quick video, and that's why it has a shorter shelf life. So that's sort of the thing. I guess to recap, video content is a very, very tough business. The economics right now don't really support 99% of endeavors. But I think if you play your cards right, the way that WatchMojo built a nice little business around, evergreen, brand-safe content, there is definitely an opportunity over time to build a nice little online video news endeavor. And if you do it right, maybe AOL and Huffington Post will one day call and want to buy your company.
There you go.
We'll see. This has been HipMojo 30. Rebecca Brayton, thank you very much for watching. I've been your host, Ashkan Karbas-Rushan.